And we watched the Sunil video for ages, but I do like your boy Sunil make some good content. Gacha games have terrible gameplay. Interesting. Now, I don't know if this title's to be taken literally. I think there's some arguments to be made from probably a lot of people who don't play gacha games that they do have terrible gameplay. Now, I don't mean the actual specific mechanics themselves, but more how the gacha monetization affects how the games are laid out, how the games are planned, how you access the content, and how you're potentially gated. That's what I'm assuming we're going to be talking about, because you can look at games like Arknight, great gameplay. Wuthering Waves, great gameplay. Zenny Zone Zero, great gameplay. PGR, great gameplay. You know, there's plenty of games out there that have got really good gameplay. It's just the format. So let's see what he's got to say then, shall we, guys? We're going to drop a preemptive like as well.
Gameplay. Gachas. A comparison that has the connection of oil and water, like recommending a new album to a deaf person, like mixing macaroni and cheese with ketchup. Haiku, though, you should probably try that last one. It actually
that sounds vile.
Kind of slaps. But the point of the matter is, to a lot of people, this shit doesn't mix well. A lot say these games can't have good gameplay because of their monetization method. It's like, you ever try recommending a gacha game to your friend by saying it has good gameplay, then they reply with the fucking credit card swiping gif? That's pretty much what I'm talking about. But the question is, do they got a point? Like, okay, yeah, sure, not having all the characters in a game does suck, but at the same time, is that reason enough to say all the gameplay in that game is terrible? So then I started to think about the topic more, started thinking about how the monetization method changes the games I've played a fair bit of, then I came to a realization. People who say the gameplay in these games is worse because of their monetization aren't really wrong, and not for the sole and obvious.
Well, they're not, are they, really? You know, look, anybody who's watching this probably now is a fan of gacha games, right? Maybe not so much the gacha, but you're a fan of the games you play. Like, I like gacha games. I'm not even going to lie. I enjoy the act of doing the gachas. I get it, right? They've got me. They've psychologically got me. I liked opening loot fucking boxes or loot crates in loot boxes in COD back in the day. But I think it's fair to say it affects the way the game's designed, right? It affects the way the end game's designed. It affects the way events are designed. It affects the way the patch-to-patch gameplay is designed. It affects the story. It affects the way characters are designed and introduced. It affects pretty much every aspect of the game. Now, some games do it better where they put the gameplay, if you like, gameplay game first, gacha second kind of style, which there is games that do it better, but every game is affected by it, right? Every single game is affected by it to a degree.
Obvious reason of you don't have all the characters, because A, that'd be a boring point to make an entire video around, and B, and some of them I fucking do, but there are valid reasons to judge the gameplay beyond that. So that's what the rest of this video is, talking about how the monetization,
you don't enjoy the game and not gonna lie, you find it stressful.
Sometimes directly makes the gameplay of any gacha worse. So basically, the long and short of it is, I'm turning into a hater. That's what this video is about. I'm being a hater. When it's over, expect this channel to go off into making solely COD gameplay videos. That's the future of this shit. But to talk about why I think there's truth to the statement, the first game I'm gonna bring up is Arknights. Speaking
of COD, let me just say, you know what? Honestly, I am not a fan of the way you buy stuff in COD now, the way you buy the weapon fucking blueprints. I don't like it. I preferred just getting like weapons and then you can apply skins to the weapons. I don't like the variant thing, like, because it just lacks a little bit of customizability. Like, some of them look fucking sick, right? I don't know if they've changed things in the recent COD. I ain't played COD this year, right? But yeah, I was never a big fan of the blueprint stuff. And they're far too expensive as well. And this is coming from somebody who spent hundreds of pounds on Valorant, right? You know?
As it's a game that's avoided all of the regular pitfalls you would imagine with this topic. Like, most people who have been playing the game for a while have about 90% of the units in it. I don't care if it's a personal anecdote or not, but most of the people on my list got about that much. I got 97% myself and more than 500 pulls stashed away. I only buy the monthly pass. The game's incredibly generous. So if that ain't the problem, then is it the gameplay? Is that just shit? Nope. You can bring in 12 characters that all play differently, and you could place them anywhere on the stage. It's a tower defense, which makes it so many factors change how you play the stage, like which units are bringing in, if they have faction bonuses, the stage, the mechanics of it, and where you place your units. To the point where pretty much every stage in the game actually plays differently, and this amount of hyper customization also makes it so you could easily clear the game with low rarity units. But that brings up the question, if the gameplay is great, and the gacha isn't looking to harvest your soul, what's the problem? Well, it's one every gacha suffers due to the monetization method, which is the sense of player progression. Take Elden Ring. You start off with minimal shit to use and no solid build for your character. By all means, you're at your weakest, and the enemies you fight against are also at their weakest. But as time passes in the game, you slowly build your character, get a solid build, and advance in power bit by bit. This progression is so intimately tied to your experience and how much you've explored of the world, to where you're never at risk of being too strong and making the
It's the RPG experience, isn't it? You know, it's the path of building your character as you progress through the game, right? Which, you know, Arknights kind of, I guess, suffers from that in a sense, is that the character building is designed in a specific way because of the way the game works, right? I think it's one of the better ways in the space, quite a lot, actually, because, again, I hate having to deal with shitty substats that shaft me constantly.
Game boring.
But then you can talk about horizontal investment, right?
But for your first playthrough, character progression and what the game expects of you at any given moment are intimately tied. Then take a gacha game. In most of them, this shit doesn't really exist.
Man's mixing Enfield and Arknights. I've got it in the head, man.
It's the first E2 I had in the game. Basically, the final tier power character can
Couldn't be me. Couldn't be me. Just saying, you know? Couldn't be me.
My first E2 was Exia, and the time when I E2'd her was the Twilight of Olamon event. At that time in the game, Exia was considered a fairly strong unit, not as much as a win condition as Silver Ash, but she could put in a lot of work. In those event stages, she really propped up the run. Didn't outright carry me, but shit would have been so much harder without her at E2. Now take an account made in 2025. Let's say you played when Walter was released, and you rolled for her because everyone said she was the strongest character in the game. Then she's your first E2. Then you play the Twilight of Olamon event because you could replay all old events. She pretty much solos it. Not like Exia where it helped. Nah, she solos that shit. Yo, she walks in, pops her skill, drops 6 tactical fucking nukes, and bitches the stage. Like when Twilight of Olamon dropped, you had to use the gramophones to kill the boss that was tanky as shit. Now you just got a sadistic nuclear launcher with a switch that'll kill her in, 5 hits. And it ain't just her. A lot of the newer units also annihilate old stages, because those older ones were made when the most insane thing we had in the game was Silver Ash. Now we have Silver Ash on a cocktail of PEDs. The stage difficulty was made with player progression and the units of that time in mind. It was a good balance of difficulty.
See, I think this is why I've done the right thing in the way I've done my account in Arknights as well. I think it's, because that's the thing with what's good about Arknights, full stop, right? You've got the potential to choose that. You don't have to do that, right? It's not like a lot of other gacha games where it's like, you know, if you're not doing this, it's probably going to be quite painful, or your options are very limited. There's so much variety and viability in Arknights where you just don't have to do that. That's why, like, when everybody was like, wish you down and all that sort of stuff, I was like, actually, no, we're not going down that route. We're going to just build up a semi-decent rarity team, low rarity at the start. Now, it's definitely a little bit better with some of the units that we've got, right? But I like the fact that we haven't E2'd yet. It's an enjoyable process for me. I can't wait to E2 because I'm going to get access to the rest of the game in terms of the kits and stuff. But it's fun. Right? Those self-limitations in this game are really fun. But again, there's that argument. If it's there, why aren't you going to use it? But that's a player choice thing, right?
Then power creep happened. Now a lot of the older shit is a cakewalk. And the unfortunate part is, power creep is pretty much impossible to not have in a gacha game. Though I've already talked about why, so I don't want to dive too much into it. Long and short is that power creep happens naturally from character kits becoming more interesting or specialized.
I would also argue over time as well. I think it's a necessity. Honestly, it's just how you do it right. It's the speed it happens. If older units become fucking useless, how the content's built around the power creep. I think it's a necessity to have characters eventually just get better, right? Otherwise, you're just going to have this plateau and you're never going to want to advance. It's just how the rest of the game is designed around it, right?
As time moves on, this shit happens in any game. Or it's
any live
service
game.
Guys want you to spend more money, so they made a motherfucker with insane numbers. But the fact is, your progression in a gacha game is going to be fucking wonky. If you're a new player, newer events are going to whoop your ass, and then when you take your shiny
there's not an option if you don't even have E2.
It's going to be boring as shit. Player progression isn't tied to what the game expects of you, it's tied to...
I mean, you can say that about any gacha game, you don't use a character if it's too strong. Oh yeah, I do think there is, of course, but what I'm saying is if the content caters around new... Now, of course, if you don't give a fuck about endgame shit, at the end of the day, power creep rarely matters in any gacha game if you're sticking to the story. Now, there is games that will cock block you in story. Most of the time, if you're sticking to the story, who gives a fuck about power creep, right? But if you are planning to do events and at least partial parts of the endgame, some games will really lean into the characters, right? You know, things like Star Rail and that. You know, and there's other games that do it, of course, as well, that without those characters, you're going to have a bit of a rougher time in trying to do that content, right? Some games do handle power creep a lot better than others, right? You've got direct power creep and you've got ambient power creep, right? Some characters just get more powerful. Sometimes the game caters to them characters, and it's like, without that character, you're in a bit of a rough spot. But I agree, yeah, it is a choice at the end of the day, right?
What state the meta of the game is in. Hell, another example from Arknight's Patriot. He used to be the hardest boss in the game, had defense and resistance stats that made him near impossible to kill. You had to use the stage mechanics of mines and a very specialized team, or Amia, story reasons, to take him down. In Big 2025, he's used as montage fodder.
We'll be doing this soon. We will be there. E1. We won't be doing this shit. We'll be E1. Big boy E1 moves, and we're going to make it happen.
For new characters.
The new meta.
Literally, people solo him. Hell, some characters solo the entire stage. Patriot and enemies included. The perspective of someone who fought Patriot when he dropped versus nowadays is night and day. I used to fear Patriot. Now when I look at him getting clipped, bro, it's like I just watched someone kick a puppy.
I just feel fucking to incentive. Yeah.
Deadass had to use a support unit back then to beat him. Now I'm confident I could do it with 3 characters, which is really just an arbitrary number because I know it's possible with 1. I just don't have his module. Also, another example, so I show it ain't just an Arknight thing, but instead something all Gacha's face, FGO. So many old mechanics in the game can be skipped by having Castoria. For those that don't know, her Noble Phantasm, think Ultimate, makes it so you don't take damage the next however much overcharge you had.
See, like, these sort of, like, issues for me, though, again, these are not necessarily major problems, because if you're just literally making early parts of the game super inconsequential because you're using a character, I'd just argue, just don't use that character if you want to enjoy it, right? If you want to actually experience the enjoyment. You can cheese games that are not gacha games, right? There's glitches, there's mechanics that you can cheese in video games to make them super easy, right? But do you do that? You know, you can, but you're probably going to have less fun, right? Rather than having the challenge. Again, for me, the power creep's a problem when you've got content in the game that's catered for a specific set of characters. Without those characters, it's going to be nigh on impossible to do. That's when it's a problem, right? That's when it's a problem. If early content is just super inconsequential because of new characters, I don't have a problem with that personally, because that's just a thing you can say is, oh, I've got that character, but I just ain't going to use it because I want to enjoy it, right? You know, like, I could have made the first 7 chapters of the game so much easier, right? I could have, like, really lent into farm. Once I could start E2ing characters, just start blasting characters, use my tickets, get them all a bunch of characters, E2, ramped up, modules, going in hard. But I've had more fun not doing that, right? And I know E2's not the world solver. It's not going to change everything. But, you know, and don't get me wrong, I understand where he's heading with what he's saying here, but I'm just talking about the initial early points of a game. You know, it's like any game, really. Early content or even entire content can be cheesed. It's just you got to choose whether you want to do that. Are you here for the fun, or are you here to just complete it?
Fucking work on you. And if you build the right team with her, you're literally immortal. Then you look at stages before she existed, and all of these big strong moves the bosses can launch out do nothing. Because a lot of them have ignore and vulnerability, so they can hit you even if you're invulnerable, but Castoria exists beyond that. Ignore and vulnerability doesn't fucking work against her, unless you're only using her 3rd skill, which gives you basic invulnerability. The only thing that stops her Noble Phantasm is buff removal. That's it. But the difference between having her or not is gigantic. Not enough to really be fucked without her, but it's pretty much 2 different games if you're not using her. And guess what? Anyone can use her. The game has a support system to where any player can use her if the stage doesn't force that support slot to be used for a story character. But if it's open, and you got her, the stage is way easier than how it was when it was first released. And player progression getting hurt by newer units doesn't just exist for old content either. For example, roguelites. Going back to Arknights, my run will be considerably different if I start with a meta unit or not. And to be 100, if I'm doing the higher difficulty stages, it gets to a point where you need to start with those overpowered units. Now, all in all, not that big a problem because of how generous the game is, so when you reach that point, you'll have units that can clear it. But if you're not at that point, and are a player wanting to try out the roguelikes, your experience will be much harder or much easier compared to who you got to start with. Then compare it to Night Rain. Has 8 characters that all feel different to play, and every single run you do has, of course, randomness, but the difficulty of it is suited to what the game expects of you, not what you have to beat the game. The difficulty difference between the roguelike in any gacha game basically and a regular roguelike is considerably different.
There is definite builds though that make certain stuff easier, right? You know, not even just in like Souls-like games, in other games. There is content in most games where, you know, if you build a character in a particular way, it will make life easier for the most part, right? There's always specific, well, not always, but in a lot of games, when they're designed well, there's specific things that like, yeah, this is like, will cheese or at least steamroll 80% of the content, but there's going to be that 20% where you're going to be a little bit weaker at. This is not specifically unique to gacha games. It's just it's emphasized a lot more in gacha games because it's the monetization system's the game's catered to the monetization system, right?
In regular ones, it feels like I'm walking into an even playing field. In gachas, it feels like I'm choosing which level of bullshit I want to indulge in. Because how player progression is measured with the game in mind heavily changes if it's a gacha, and this is pretty much the case for all of them.
That's fair.
But that's enough of that problem. The next one I want to bring up is found in Genshin Impact. Now, little side note when it comes to Genshin, I do want to make the distinction between gameplay and combat. Just combat would be how the game plays from battle to battle, right? But the gameplay is more the overall package, and that would include the team building as well. And the reason I make that distinction is because how I feel about the combat and how I feel about the team building is worlds apart.
Got a warfighter boss's cake if you finish all the side. A lot of games do that, right? Like, you can just stick to the main path, right? You know, RPGs do this a lot in general, right? You know, like, hell, even like MMOs, right? Where if you just stick to doing MSQ stuff, you'll get stat checked pretty much, right? At a fight where you're like, holy fuck, bro. And then you either, you know, you've got some good setups that can get you through. You're built potentially right to be able to squeeze through a fight, or it's back to grinding, right? And as you say, if you've hit loads of side quests, done loads of grinding, spent time farming, those bosses will become inconsequential, right? At the end of the day, again, and he's not saying it's unique to gacha games. It's just emphasized much more in gacha games, right? Because again, it is, right? And there's a reason why a lot of people don't like these things, because in a lot of gacha games, some of the unfavorable parts of games that people don't like are kind of, you know, they're in excess in gacha games, aren't they?
Team building and the reaction system is genuinely a masterpiece in game design. The gameplay is, yeah. The long and short of why I don't like the combat is actually two-parter at this point. See, at first I wrote a fair bit of the Genshin segment based upon my thoughts of the game from when I last quit it. Then for gathering footage, I re-downloaded it and played the 2 new game modes in the Spiral Abyss. Then I realized they addressed the problems for some game modes and fights, but still kind of missed the mark. So the problem I have with Genshin is the combat is very formulaic. You go into a fight, start your rotation. Generally speaking, with the teams I ended up using, you swap in, Q and E, swap, Q and E, swap, Q and E, swap, do whatever you gotta do to get the damage off on your hyper carry. That's it. Most combat you're gonna do in the game is gonna be like that. A variation of swapping as you spam Q and E and sometimes left click. Throughout most teams you'll make in the game, they'll feel pretty much the same on the mechanical.
I think this is why, like, it's probably part of me was I'm a little bit burnt out on Wuthering Waves, because it's kind of the same sort of thing there. It's just a little bit more nuance, right? There's a few extra layers to it kind of thing, but it is kind of like, you know, skill, you know, build concerto, build your forte, drop your shit, outro, intro, rotation, do, you know, repeat, rinse, repeat kind of thing. Now, of course, I do think there's a little bit more nuance there, but it's kind of the same sort of thing, right? I think this is why I've been having such a blast with Arc Knights, because it's just not that. It's just not that, right?
End of what you, the player, is inputting. When you have your team, the way you play them from when you got them to hours later is gonna look pretty much the same, bar having more energy regen for tighter rotations. And other people using the team will look similar as well, because you stick to the rotation. It's optimal. That is what you're meant to do. But the rotation itself being boring and the fact that you as a player barely have reason to change this singular rotation is the problem. There's not much that pushes you outside of this. At most, you can maybe double back to a healer to press one additional button if it's needed, but aside from that, same shit, different day, with the exception of some enemies. An easy example is like Scaramouche. In that boss fight, you gotta spend the second half dodging and building up resources.
You're not ready to tackle CC3 pigs.
But aside from that, the enemies in the game, and most importantly the Spiral Abyss, usually just stand there like training
ready for me to be ready.
They don't
That's
really
what
got
it is.
interesting attacks aside from something you occasionally need to dodge. It makes the game mode just a damage check instead of really being hard to clear. And that's the problem I had with the combat in the past. Now, it's a little different.
A lot of games do suffer from the damage check, stat check stuff, don't they?
Play differently. Like, the enemy in the first
again, though, plenty of RPGs do it over the years, though.
Abyss. That one you cannot just mindlessly attack to beat it. You have to play into its mechanic. And what's that mechanic? It rips away all your energy if you stand next to it after it first spawns in. And the way to stop that is to break its shield, which will give your energy back. The thing is, a lot of characters need to use their ultimates to break it, so they need energy, which the enemy rips away from you. What are we doing here? You took the most integral part of the gameplay away with an enemy mechanic.
Yo, Mohammed, thanks for the sub.
Why? But to be honest, aside from how annoyed I was when I first found the enemy, I did appreciate it existing, because it made me actually play differently for once. The enemy wasn't just a punching bag, I had to counter what it was doing. So what are the ways to counter it? Well, the ones I found were wait out its time on the sidelines till the attack's done. Not optimal, you lose a lot of time. The other is freeze it before it does the attack so you cancel it. Or you can bring in characters that are more built around using their skill for damage and reactions, whose ultimate isn't really needed for breaking the shield. Or you can bring in Mavweek or Skirk, because they both don't lose their ult energy from it. They just ignore the boss's mechanic, as both of their banners are up during this rotation, and the Abyss buffs up pyro and cryo damage. Kind of feels like you're putting on a strap-on and selling me the lube.
Kind of Hoyo does, alright. It's kind of what Hoyo does.
Doesn't it? So here's the problem with it being a gacha. It's that 2 out of these 4 strategies revolve around you gambling. Only 2 because you could still freeze the enemy with a free-to-play team. But for the other ones, if you needed characters that are very good at triggering the reactions with just their skills, you more than likely gotta gamble for them. Either for 5 stars like that or constellations on 4 stars to make them actually usable. Mainly that's just the case for the newer 4 stars. Or you can swipe on one of the 2 banners active during this Abyss and skip the enemy mechanic entirely. Now, not saying it's impossible if you don't do that, but you're going to have a considerably harder time if you don't. You know, the thing is, the boss was different to engage with, and in any other game it'd be
and as well, for me, you know, when you don't have like the premium units, right? I'm okay with things being harder, right? I just want it to be engaging harder. You know, not like banging my head against the wall kind of harder, and sometimes really relying on a bit of luck as well. Again, like for me, that's what like Star Rail drops into, as you say, bit of a shallow gameplay loop, a game of haves and have-nots, and without it's just like fucking unfun time. That's when I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of checking out now. I don't mind getting cock blocked and my cheeks spread a few times when I don't have a unit. It's just like, right, I gotta lock in now. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, there's stuff like that in Arc Knights, right? Where it's like, if I had this unit, I know I'd be able to steamroll this stage. But it's kind of fun not having it, because it's not like, right, I've just got to bang my head against the wall now and just try, and hopefully I'll get lucky and I get through. It's like, I got to strategize. I got to think this out now. I got to plan something differently. I got to switch out some units, try some different stuff. And when you pull it off, it's like, oh my god, it's fucking good. You know what I mean?
To take in a different team comp for this challenge, but Genshin, with being a gacha game,
was this Wuthering Impact Genshin Waves?
You've also needed to engage with the gambling, so it's not like it's a
by
level playing field on a game of
skill
what
check
you
for
can use,
the dodge
but ends up being a
reflex.
case of who you have.
Was it a little bit like Expedition 33 like that? Is it
the entire Night Soul mechanic, which some bosses interact with a lot, but guess what? Only Natlin characters can do shit when it comes to the Night Soul mechanic.
Or
so
if you just E2.
Any non-Natlin character can't do shit about that. Like this fucking boss.
The satisfaction of overcoming friction, yeah. Hyperglazing. I gotta get at least once a video, right?
Not by design, get by with jumping up certain spots for certain character models or using a Zhongli pillar. But why the fuck did they make this just a Natlin character thing instead of a mechanic of the game normally? Like, yo, climbing's already in the game. You didn't have to make our characters' upper body strength the equivalent of the people who actually play the game to rip that shit away from us. But they did it that way because they want people to swipe. Granted,
I'll say, to be fair, I'm asthmatic and I've got more stamina than Genshin characters, though. You know, just saying.
They give you free options to help with it, but again, the problem comes back to it being a gacha. Yes, you could use the free options, but they'll be significantly worse than the paid ones. Though aside from that, Genshin has, in the past, in my opinion, felt like a game that valued vertical investment a lot. That's why Constellations are so broken. They made it so that you'll be more likely to invest heavily into some characters you love over horizontal progression, because for years, only 2 teams was enough. But now there's a mechanic that you can't use your old vertically invested characters to beat, and instead, you're incentivized to roll for newer ones, which maybe wouldn't be too bad on its own, but the game gives you fuck nothing in terms of pulls, and Natlin has been horrifically bad with the pull economy compared to other patches. And then there's the theater mode, which came out recently, and I'm gonna say something controversial. I actually really like playing it. I enjoyed it. It gave me
You're not allowed to say that. You can't say that. You can't say that. It's 2025, bro. You can't say you like Genshin Impact modes and events. That's not allowed. It's not allowed. The gacha police are going to get you now.
Jackass teams, and I had to think about what was optimal to use for them instead of these same sequence I've done thousands of times. But the problem of the theater mode is that you need a horizontally invested account to really engage with it. They give you trial units, but they're kinda dog shit, not gonna lie. On normal difficulty, not a problem. The second you go higher, you're gonna want to start to gamble for units. And this problem ain't helped by the fact you could really only use characters of a specific element for that rotation. And yes, you do have friend units you could use, but that's only once per season, not run, season. So the game mode on paper is really fun to play, but in practice, a lot
Just
of the
vibe into the
enjoyment of it
music.
comes from a gambling check because it's a gacha. If you don't have a wide array of invested units, you're kinda just fucked. If it was a regular game, this wouldn't be a problem. Now, this does sound like it's coming to the basic problem of you don't have all the characters in the game, therefore game bad. Which is why I want to clear this up. The problem isn't that you don't have all the characters. The problem is that the game is putting very arbitrary checks in gameplay that makes you want or need to gamble more. Like having that mechanics old units just can't do.
Like,
having the
I'm not a fan of this stuff, right? I'm not. I don't like this stuff. Like, I get it, right? I said this before. It's like, you know, I'm not the biggest fan of stat checks, whether it's mechanic checks or just stat checks, damage checks, right? But I get it. I understand why not so much these sort of things. Obviously, these are there to maximize profits, of course, right? I get that. I'm not stupid. But, like, I understand why stat checks and stuff are in games. But as long as you've got plenty of other stuff for me to do, and that's just one element of the game, and it's like, I can ignore that. I don't mind. I'm not one of these people in gacha games that I have to complete every part of the game for it to be a good game. I can happily have that part of the game. Okay, that's not for me. That's for the whales, right? Okay, I'll argue, sucks, right? But if that's how it is, as long as the rest of it's good and I can access it and I can enjoy it and I can clock stuff because I can get better at the game, or I can come up with some cool ideas, but I'm just not going to be able to do that because I haven't spent enough money. I'm not going to lie, I'm not too mad about it. I'm in the casino, right? I'm not going to be at the high roller table because I ain't got the big bucks and I don't get to sit up there with big bottles of champagne. I ain't going to walk into the casino and be like, bruh, what the fuck, man? This is pay to win, you know? Now, I'm not saying that's what he's saying. This is just a personal thing, right? I don't really mind too much, but at the same time, it sucks. It does. It sucks.
mode only let you bring in certain elements aside from all the characters you got. These are tactics to make you pay for more characters. They are making a problem and selling you the solution. If those Natla mechanics could be done by any character, and if you could bring in your normal roster for the theater game mode, these things wouldn't inherently change. They'd remain the same, but Hoyo gets less money doing it that way. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying Genshin needs to become a paid-only game. God, no. The fact you get this much content in the game for the price of zero is objectively amazing. Being a gacha helps make that a reality. But this video is about shortcomings in gameplay of gacha games, and Genshin has a lot of shortcomings because of it being a gacha. Like tying new systems or cool shit to something only recent characters you have to swipe for can do. Like how Natlan characters fix the expiration being asked by having their own vehicles they can summon that other characters can't. As it expands, Genshin is getting more interesting, albeit game modes, exploration enemies, and bosses, but to really engage with and have as much fun as you can with that, you need to swipe. Which does always exist in gachas. If you want to use the new fun characters, you gotta pay. But some of them help that by being very generous, and Genshin, God no, it doesn't even come close. The progression of the game and its systems leaves behind players that do not have the units to engage with it, so it ends up being hell for free-to-plays that don't play every day or returning players. It sucks. I think Genshin's becoming more interesting in play.
Man, I don't want to do the bootleg career, right? But like, I understand why companies do that. As a gamer, I don't like it. Right, it makes sense, right? You know, it's about the balance, right? It's about making it so enough free-to-play players can enjoy that the whales cover it, right? And Genshin's done a real good job at doing that over the years, hasn't it? I think it's just now it looks like, according to people who are still playing the game, I'm not, that it's starting to ramp up just a little bit now, because I think Genshin's been really quite good with those things over the years. I do. Things like power creep, right? You know, the game's what? 5 years? Well, we're coming up to 6 years now, right? Is it coming up to 6 years now? Where are we at now with Genshin? What was it? Was it 2020 he dropped now? Was it 2019? 2020, Ronnie? You know? And I think it's done a decent job over the years, you know. A lot of other games, fucking hell, look at Sarail. Look at the cliff that fell off in terms of creep in the game. It was way more drastic, right? I think Genshin did quite a good job for quite a long time. So like, I'm not even mad at it. Like, Genshin, I don't, like, again, I don't play the game anymore. I don't even get mad about Genshin having power creep personally, because I think you're 5 years in and the game's really starting to get power creep. Then I'm like, okay, I guess. Genshin's half a year younger than Arknights, I believe.
Places I thought it was lacking, like combat and your traversal through the world, but it being a gacha game and having these changes tied intimately to who you have on your account is holding it back. But
Creep only started kicking in during
let's
Fontaine.
talk about a game that's done the opposite of that. Has had its characters go beyond the original scope of the game and make it lose part of its identity. Punishing Grey Raven. I'm not gonna lie, it actually kinda hurts to say this about the game because I still think it's really fucking good, but the game evolved into a weird way where the combat became flashier, but worse to me. When the game first dropped, the characters were more simple in their moveset. The hits weren't any grand spectacle, and you needed to be on point with dodging and parrying. You had stuff to build towards when it came to their core passive, and the characters felt a bit different in how they approached combat, but as time passed on in the game and the units progressed, it became iframe simulator. A lot of the new frames would have large swaths of times where they couldn't get hit. Like for example, Stigmata's hold left click after you pop her first ult. During all of this, she cannot be hit. Stuff like this, where I'm just attacking and not being able to get hit back,
Crimson Weave, absolutely adore. Kuro, please do a PGR crossover and make Crimson Weave playable. For the love of God, please.
Became the norm. There used to be a point where dodging and parrying were big focuses of the game, but as time passed, I just ended up going into a fight, following the rotation, and not really worrying about what the fuck the enemy was doing during that because it's not like the jackass could hit me anyway. Some bosses circumvented this, like the parry ball, to where if you wanted to be optimal, you needed to, well, parry the ball, but a lot of the ones for Phantom Pain Cage I just never interacted with and spammed out my invulnerability moves because that's what was optimal. Like on paper, you can still hear why so many people love the game. The character kits are interesting, they feel fairly differently from each other, moves are flashy, bosses are cool, but it gets reduced a lot because I have the power of God protecting the anime waifu whenever she wants to be flashy and look at the camera. So I ended up not caring about what the enemy was doing and just did what guides said was the optimal way to play the character or team. Because even if the boss is popping the fuck off and throwing out some fucking attacks like Rodon, the fuck does it matter when that shit has the lethality of a gust of wind against my character that's spending half the fight invulnerable? So it got
my roster on PGR is quite small anyway, really, and I only ever played up to chapter 10, I want to say. So I can't really comment on that specifically. I didn't have Stigmata either. Tried to get her, but I don't have her. PGR combat has become so bloated. PGR combat is such an uninteractive button mash. My problem is, still on the PGR section, is that he's seeking hard content in Phantom Pain Cage. The problem is, PPC is very easy for semi-experienced players at least. It's so flashy, but there's a line no brain input aside from doing the optimal rotation. I remember Genshin players crying about how low rewards as long as it's been out. Could I need to make more characters like PGR and Wuhan Man? I would like to see, like, I'd love to see Bianca in Wuthering Waves. I definitely would like to see Crimson Weave in there, man. Holy shit. In Babel Tower, bosses ignore Matrix if you set the modifier. Overspeed, Trial of a Simulacrum, etc. Bosses in PPC are a dumbed down version of themselves, and most of them don't even have the mechanics that they have in their main story counterparts. Okay. I have come to loathe action games that puts a lot of focus on rotations. I'm not gonna lie, man. I've not gone that far, right? I've not gone that far, but I'm a little bit bored of it, right? I think, like, playing Genshin, coming into Wuthering Waves, playing Wuthering Waves pretty much every day for the better part of a year, right? Investing a lot of time into that game. I am not at the point where I'm loathing that, but I am kind of over it, right? Not forever, but it's not what I'm looking for in my next action gacha. You know, it's really, this poor screen is my experience with PGR. It's not what I'm looking for in my next experience. I'm hoping Azure Familiar does something a little bit different. This is why I do like the look of Neverness to Everness, minus, like, I've got a lot of issues where it needs to improve on, but that looks like that's what that's going to be all about as well, which, again, don't know if I'm necessarily looking for that. I'm a bit worried that Silver Palace is kind of going to be that as well, you know, where we're going to go down that route also. You know, he's talking about the abundance of iframes, dagger, not the mechanics. Oh, okay, you're talking to each other, yeah. Yeah, but yeah, I don't mind, obviously, on-field and off-field characters buffing and complementing each other and stuff, but yeah, I want to get away from that, of, like, get onto my character, you know, my first starting character, drop a couple of skills, build up whatever, buff into the next character, do that same thing again. into my main damage dealer, rotate, rotate, rotate. I'm not saying there's not fun there. And don't get me wrong, Wuthering Waves has insanely good combat. I just want something a bit different, right? Because again, I am in this boat now where this is why I really like what Enfield, and I'm not saying there isn't like obviously a rotation to your skills in Enfield and stuff, but this is why I'm really excited about Enfield because it's doing something a little bit different. And I'm not, I don't dislike, I just don't want just every game to be that. I don't want every action gacha game to be like, okay, here you go. This is what we're doing now. We're rotating through your 3 optimal characters, and if you're not doing that, the game's going to punish you. And it's like, is that really skill, or is that just muscle memory, right? And obviously I know skill in a lot of, FPS shooters. Muscle memory is a big factor, right? Of course. But I don't want that. I want muscle memory to be a thing in, my inputs and stuff, but I want to do... I think this is what, again, I think this is why I've been having so much fun on Arc Nights, man. Because it's just not that easy.
To the point where all I did in the fights was just what was optimal on paper. The only thought I really put into the boss was what element they were weak to. And I want to make one thing clear about my thoughts. Rotations inherently are not the problem. Having a set of things you do in combat to be optimal isn't a bad thing. It's just the absence of interacting with the game that gets boring. Like for example, and this may be an extreme example, Final Fantasy XIV. Now, I know what you're going to say, a bit hard to compare the combat when in PGR you only use a couple of buttons for your input, and in Final Fantasy XIV you alternate between your entire fucking keyboard. Which is why I want to say, for the purposes of this example, throw the fucking keyboard out, right? Just imagine when it comes to this game, you're controlling your rotation using a fucking automaton. Just imagine the buttons you gotta press in the game are as boiled down to a simple 1, 2, 3. Even if that was done, the game wouldn't get boring because you still need to interact with the bosses. You still need to know what they're going to be doing in the fight. Even though what you're doing on your end is simple,
This is why I hope to God we really lean into boss mechanics in Enfield, because I think it will be a defining factor in boss combat of it being good and peak, right?
Attention to them is what shakes up the combat, especially considering how they all play differently. But if you get to ignore them and hit up a highlight reel on their dying body, it gets boring eventually. Yeah, I'm not saying the enemies in PGR have to be mechanically complicated, I'm just saying the game has progressed from a point to where it doesn't feel like the enemy you fight matters, while in the past, you had to generally think about actually interacting with them. And the big worry is that since the characters you roll for have so far been incredibly flashy and spam out iframes, if the new ones you roll for don't do that, then they will be seen as worse. If they try to reduce it with newer characters, people are going to be mad that the new ones they've released are worse than the older characters, which PGR is unique with, because yes, that does mean people are asking for power creep, but the player base is fine with power creep because you can get every character in the game for free, not even exaggerating. So hearing that is a little weird from the outside perspective, but it's the norm for PGR because new units have been consistently power creeping older ones. But each character going more over the top than the last brought us to the current point where bosses don't feel too interactive, which is where I gotta compliment Wuthering Waves, because as of now, I feel like the game doesn't have that. What you aim to do with your characters is like PGR, the kits are interesting and the characters play differently. There's more to combat than just pressing a few buttons and swapping out. But there also isn't the mass and vulnerability spam to you to where you can just ignore the enemy. You need to...
Is there though? I don't know if I agree with that. Like when you're fighting like holograms, right? Of course you have to be reactive to what's going on. You have to be restrictive and defensive and more conservative and stuff. But you kind of really just do that, if I'm honest. You just optimal rotation, optimal rotation, optimal rotation. Especially if you're leaning into things like Tower of Adversity and stuff. Literally, that's all Tower is. It's adequately invested characters, a good DPS, optimal rotations. I know people will stand there and talk about like dungeon solos in this, that content and that content, but it's kind of really what the game is, right? That's Christ. There's a reason they're patenting their fucking technology behind their quick swapping and concerto and intro and outros. Fundamentally, what the game is.
Build what your character is looking to accomplish before you swap them out as you're dodging the enemy. And at the extreme, the hologram endgame mode has the enemies hitting you once and you fucking exploding. So you gotta pay attention, and as you're doing that,
that's where I will definitely talk about Wuthering Waves in regards to that's where it shines, is the holograms. But it feels like, and no, don't get me wrong, we've got more hologram content, but I think it should be front and center. Honestly, all the time. I want more like Depths of Elusive Realm to come back. I want that Trials Protocol, fucking whatever thing is called, Trials Crisis Mode. But like for me, hologram, that's where Wuthering Waves shines, man. That at its core is when it's fucking peak, right? Because you are doing a little bit different. It's reactive to what's going on with the boss mechanics rather than just be like, let's pile power in by optimal rotations.
That you need to make sure you're following the optimal
Doesn't mean it's bad either. You know what I mean?
Best you're dodging what the boss is throwing at you, and in the windows of vulnerability, it has you building whatever resource you need to do on that character. Like putting stacks of frazzle on the boss with Phoebe, and you're not able to ignore the fight as you spend most of it unable to get hit. Now, that's not...
I'm going to be honest as well, man. I don't think neg status effects have really benefited Wuthering Waves. I don't think they've made the game... Well, actually, I don't know. In some ways, I'm not a big fan of them, right? I don't think Wuthering Waves has become a better game from them, if I'm honest.
Let's say the system is perfect. After all, some fights and combat events aren't really challenging, so it can make the combat feel very samey when you're not getting pushed. And the team building is pretty lackluster, but it does have the strength of making you, the player, interact with the gameplay. And if the gacha is known for their action, it does that the best. But those are some of the problems being a gacha causes the gameplay. Either the progression of the meta making old content feel boring,
I will say though, personally, I do think Wuthering Waves is the best action gacha game. But that being said, I've got to add the fact that if you said to me now you need to sit down today to play an action gacha game, I'm going to Zenless. I'm going to Zenless, right? Because I'm just finding Zenless more enjoyable at the moment, even in the combat. But I think it's fair that Wuthering Waves probably is the best action gacha game. At least I think that anyway. If somebody had to say to me now which is the best ones, I'd probably say Wuthering Waves. But if you said to me now what you're going to play, I'm gonna go play Zenless if I'm honest. If I'm going into the gacha side of things, action side of things personally. But I still don't think it removes the fact that it is at its core optimal rotation, repeat, really. And again, that doesn't mean the game's bad, right? I'm just saying that, like, personally, I want to see... I just hope that Silver Palace isn't there. I hope that rewinding cadence isn't there. I hope Azure Familiar isn't there. It seems like Neverness to Everness is that. I hope Ananta's not there. Because what we're doing then, we're just, again, we're back to, like, everything kind of being just a different shade of Genshin, really, right? With just an extra bit of nuance.
In game modes and enemies and validate older units, or having the strength of your characters progress in a way to where the original feel for the game is lost. I think that's why people judge the gameplay for the model so harshly. Now, are these problems world-ending? Not really. The games are still fun to play. Genshin still brings in millions, PGR is still fucking raw as hell, Arknight still keeps the game incredibly fresh even with power creep. FGO, you play it for the story. But more importantly, if you enjoy these games, that's all that matters. Because at the end of the day, fixing some of these problems is complicated. Like, if you wanted to preserve old content, then you need to restrict what players can bring into it, which would piss people off. And in the case of PGR, I don't even know how the fuck you would fix that. Only way is to just not get into that position at all. A big thing is that to fix some of these problems, it required the game to stop being a gacha, which would be...
Yeah, he's right. A lot of the problems in a lot of gacha games, right, would be fixed if the game wasn't a gacha game, if it was just like a box price game. But at the same time then, these games facilitate hours of free fun because of the gacha system. And the gacha system's designed in such a way that there's a big enough part of the audience that will throw cash at it that allows the other people who are willing to avoid certain pitfalls potentially spend a bit of extra time, or maybe even just accept okay, it's not for me, I'll just carry on playing the rest of the game and have a lot of fun, right? Again, it's like, it's pros and cons, right? You know, it's a very predatory monetization system that's, it's gambling, right? And it's fucked up a lot of people, and it makes parts of the game worse, but it also facilitates access for so many people to hundreds of hours worth of free gameplay, right?
Considerably worse, as that monetization model enables these games to have large number of players able to enjoy it for free. So in a sense, it's sorta a necessary evil. On one hand, are these criticisms correct? I'd say yeah. On the other, would the game be able to support this many free players with a different live service model? Probably not.
Probably
like,
not,
I'm
no.
willing to bet 70% or so of the people who are going to watch this video are either free to play or don't really spend much in these games.
Like,
and to fix...
I think the subscription, like, gacha games have kind of, like, shown that the subscription model's kind of dead, right? You know, now I know there's still games running on subscription services and doing fine, but they're very few and far between, right? Very few and far between. Most games, if they go free to play, rely on gacha now, or they rely on skins, right? And typically, gacha games crush skin-based games, don't they? You know, Battle Pass skins, Battle Pass gacha. The gachas just, we see the numbers, right? It's fucking way more profitable.
Some problems. Adopting a model of game that isolates 70% of people, like becoming subscription-based or expansion-based, is considerably fucking worse than dealing with the problems. So that's why I want to say some of them are avoidable, others were primarily done by greed, and some are inevitable. But it's part of the reason why gachas ain't known for their gameplay compared to other genres. Instead, they're known for the speedrun categories of how fast you can max out a credit card.
Right there. I do think that's going to change. I think perspective of gacha gameplay, I hope, is going to shift over the next coming years with all of the games that we've got. You know, things like Wuthering Waves, things like Familiar, things like Enfield. I've got to throw fucking Arknights in there. I've only just discovered it, and I think it's a fucking diamond in the rough, right? And all of these other games that are coming forward that are like, you know, the line between AAA and gacha is like blurred, right? I think that will probably change, but you're never going to get away from the fact that there's going to be the pitfalls of gacha that's just going to dictate how the game's designed, right? Some will do it better, some will do it worse. It's just about finding enjoyment where you can. And when a game starts to piss you off, just fucking go play something else. And I think that's the best way to solve it, right? Personally, because it's a necessary evil, I think, of these games. Honestly, I do. Unless there's a new monetization system that comes forward and people support it, it's a necessary evil. We could say, well, nah, they can do skins, they can do this, they can do that. Why aren't all these other games succeeding hand over fist like gacha games are? Because people will just play the game free to play, right? They've got no need to buy the skin. Or if a character's really good, you know, they can get some extra currency from buying the battle pass. They'll do it, right? They'll do it. But yeah, I think that was a good video. That was a good video. There's parts where I definitely disagree with Sunil, but I think overall what he's trying to get at, I think he's fundamentally correct. The gacha monetization factually affects the way the games are provided, right? And I think a lot of the times it's negative. I just think it facilitates hundreds of hours worth of free gameplay as well. So, you know, you gotta take your battles, pick your battles where you can, right?